This video is sponsored by Brush Galaxy. Okay, on this tutorial I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are easier to follow than you might imagine so that you can have a go and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this tutorial down into steps that are easy to follow so that you learn about the painting techniques as well as the app that I'm using, Procreate. Having said that, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. But within Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And again, the color profile comes within Procreate and it is the code that ends in 2.1, the sRGB code. In terms of the brushes, I'm just going to use the brushes that come free with the app. So within airbrushing, we're going to use the soft brush, the medium brush, and the hard brush. And within luminance, I'm going to be using the light pen. And that should be it. It's quite a simple, straightforward tutorial, really. In terms of the colors, I've pre-selected a color palette, which is here. Each of these colors has a link to it associated with it, a hexadecimal code, which you can type into this box. Each of these codes is down in the video description, so you just need to take note of them, type them in here one at a time, press enter, and the color appears at the top corner. And then you can just tap it together yourself. Or next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free to save you some time. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel, gain access to extended versions of these tutorials and other content. I'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone who's either supported me in the past or continues to over at Patreon. It really enables me to keep this channel going, so thank you so much. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge some of the really superb versions of my last tutorial, the Halloween pumpkin. I'm just showing you a few on screen now of the people that have tagged me over at Instagram. Again, the link for my Instagram is down in the video description if you'd like to do similar. And with all that said and done, let's get started. So with this A4 canvas, I'm just going to turn it onto its side. So we've got it in a portrait orientation. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go to the first color on the top row. I'm going to drag from that little circle into the canvas and flood fill it. Next, using the airbrushing soft brush, I'm going to go back to my colors. I'm going to use the second color. I'm going to put the brush size really high up. That's about 80%. And the opacity, not quite at the top. I'm going to put it around 50. And just at this upper area, I'm going to do a dot of that and once more. Then I'm going to turn the brush down to 10% size, stay at the 50% opacity, and just in this bottom area, I'm just going to do a band of that across, like so. And then the whole thing on that layer, adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in to about the 30%. So I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 2. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to go to the airbrushing hard brush. I'm going to put the brush size at 45% and 100% opacity, and I'm going to use the third color on the top row. Now in this upper area, I'm just going to do one dot like this. And then I'm going to go to the layer, tap on the layer, and put on Alpha Lock, which you will know is activated because you've got a little checkerboard background there on the thumbnail. I'm going to switch back to the soft brush with an airbrushing, back to my colors, and I'm going to use the fourth color. I'm going to put the brush size, well, we'll keep it at the 10% in fact, and we'll keep it at the 50% opacity. And I'm just going to draw a circle around the edge, but I want to keep the center a little bit darker. Back to my colors, I'm going to use the fifth color, and along the top, I'm just going to do a band or a section lighter. And then to the next color, the sixth color, and probably with a lower opacity, I'm going to put that down to about 20. I want it to be there, but not too strong. I'm just going to add this to the sides, start adding some warmth creeping in, like so. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in to about the 15%. Then I'm going to go back to the layer, tap on it again, and turn off the Alpha Lock. Then back to the adjustments and the Gaussian blur, and just blur it in because I want to soften that edge. I don't want it to be quite that sharp. So I'm going to blur it in. Not quite 5%, I think about 4% will do. And I'm going to go to the adjustments, liquify, and I'm going to set the size at around 25% and the pressure at 100% or max. No distortion or momentum. And then from the center area, roughly, I'm just going to do a few points at which I'm going to drag it down, and from the edge, And then I'm going to have it sort of keep pushing it and pushing it out so it kind of flares out over in this direction and over in that direction. And then I'm going to bring it down from the center as well. And I really want these little divisions because they are going to kind of represent almost like folds in fabric. Now obviously it's going to be a ghost, so it's not really fabric as such, but it has that kind of almost organic look. And then when we get to the very edge, I'm just going to start to twist and curl it up. Maybe curl it the other way a little bit. Maybe have another one here. Just a bit fiddly, but you can do it. Now, you don't need to copy them exactly as I'm showing you, but something similar. And then we're going to come down to the lower section. And just, it does take a little bit of pushing it around and manipulating it, but it's actually quite a fun thing to do. It's quite easy. And you can really create some nice wispy shapes. You can always add to these, obviously, but just initially, it's really a good way of getting started. Now I'm going to drag it down a little bit more from the top as well, just to bring some of that darkness down. And then maybe I'll increase the size up to 30. Oops. And then I can really go to town on some of the bottom shapes. Just move it up a little bit. Think about the kind of swirl and the almost like zigzagging swirling shape. And we want it to end up around this point where we've got that light band. Doesn't really matter, we're just trying to get the overall shape, and if it twists and turns and goes off shape a little bit, it's not a problem. It'd be quite nice. It's less of a soft look once it does that, but that could be quite interesting if it's slightly more gnarly looking. Might be a look that you prefer anyway. Just going to dial that back a little bit. I did prefer a little bit softer in this area. So if you just want to broaden up any areas, you can just go to the bit that you want to thicken up, manipulate it in, close up any gaps. You've also got other ones like this pinch. You can go in there with the pinch and it will just close up those little gaps together. If you wanted to do something like that, that's another useful tool, as well as the push. I think I prefer the push overall, but there's all sorts of different ways that you can manipulate. So I'm going to switch that off. Then I'm going to go to the smudge. I'm going to put the smudge on the medium hard brush within airbrushing. Have it at around 3% size and 80% opacity. And we can kind of continue to do the same thing, but it has a softer appearance. So any hard edges now that we've accumulated in that process with the liquify, now we can start to soften those in. But we can continue to add to the shapes. Extend them out, have them branch off even. Soften in. I'll zoom in a bit more so you can see. Again, we can just have them veering off in different directions too. Just really gives you a nice opportunity to smooth some things in if it's necessary, because it is quite a sharp edge when you use the liquify push, but now you can just soften that in a little bit. So we're using default brushes in this tutorial, but if you'd like to bring your art to the next level, you could try premium brushes from Brush Galaxy. Brush Galaxy enables you to unlock over 50,000 premium Procreate brushes for a fraction of the price, and you can access over 20 different categories such as fur, lettering, nature, animals, and many others. So for example, at this time of the year, in autumn, in fall, a quick search of leaves gives you page after page of really useful brushes and stamps that you might want to use in your paintings, and they can be super helpful. Obviously too, we're in the middle of building up towards Halloween, and a quick search for that gives you tons of different Halloween themed stamps and brushes too. Start now and get the first 7 days for free. Join thousands of other artists using Brush Galaxy tools to bring their art to the next level. The link is in the comments and in the description. Smudge things together a bit more if you want to in places. Again, there's no real right and wrong with some of these things. It's just whatever catches your eye and whatever shapes you want to create. Then as we come down here, I feel like I just want to soften some of this in. I may just go in with one of the airbrushes in a minute and just add them more manually, but it's quite easy at this stage just to use these two tools. So you've got the liquify initially and now this smudge, and that combination can get you a lot of the way. So again, just up to the top, just try to create some more divisions in this kind of look up here, just drag down some of the dark shapes into the mix and also extend some of those lighter tones up, perhaps, just to create some more separation. That texture, it doesn't look flat, that really helps. Just backwards and forwards on that. Okay, I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer. Layer 3. I'm going to tap on the layer and put on clipping mask. So anything we add to this layer now is going to be linked to the layer underneath, which means we can go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, choose a different color, maybe go for the first color on the middle row. I'll put the brush size down to 2%, 20% opacity, and I can just start bringing in some of these other colors and stays within the boundaries of the shapes we've already created. So I'm just going to go and kind of complement some of these shapes, extend, bring a little bit more clarity. So we've got a whole section there where it's not really got any division, any clear form. So I'm just going to go in there and just exaggerate them a little bit. Bring more definition. Maybe just go in and just color in large sections, in fact. We could put our brush size up to 10% and just generally bring a lot more light into this lower area. A change of color. We've got more of a warmer blue at the top, but we're bringing in a bit more of the aqua greeny blues in the bottom area. Just soften that in. And that works. Move along to the next color. Second color on the middle row. Brush size down again. Lower part of 2%. Probably lower on the opacity as well. Let's put it at around 15. And then I'm just going to go in there and just, again, more clearly define some of these edges. Again, you can't really go into any areas where we haven't already got a form, but you can just go in there and add highlights. I'm not going to add too many of these strong colors near the top. I just want it to be kind of fading out into that area of the head. But as we come a bit further down, we can have a bit more clarity in a detail here, for example, and maybe some strands that work alongside it. Gently introduce it down here as well. Maybe another one that just curls off. And we don't want to lose some of the twists and curls, so let's just make sure we get some of that back in there again a little bit. I think it might have become a little bit lost. Let's start adding some more bands that describe the kind of movement of some of these a little bit. Okay, with that top layer, I'm going to merge it down just to keep things simple. So it's all on one layer now, again. So we again go to the adjustments, liquify, push. I'm going to put it down to 25 again. Max pressure, no distortion, no momentum. And then push these around. In fact, that's too small. Let's try it bigger again. Let's go back up to the 30%. There's quite a big difference between the two. But yeah, I can push these in. Push it the other way. Have these going where we want. And just, yeah, exaggerate some of these shapes if we feel that they've not quite got the same flow that we were hoping. And again, we could continue pushing some of these shapes around. We use the smudge to soften them in, but we can use this now to extend some of those again with the liquify. Why not? It's getting very tenderly and I quite like that. Okay, I'm going to go to the layers and create a new layer on top. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to add by scrolling down. So you tap on the little N that was there, scroll down to add, and you notice it's now changed to an A. So with this layer, I'm going to use the first color on the middle row with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to have it at maybe about 5% size and about 5% opacity. And I'm just going to start in these lower areas, start bringing in a bit more glow. I don't really want it to be any dark color in this lower section. So by going in and kind of fusing them together or helping blend them together on this light glow, it just makes them work as a whole area better, I think. So we can just sort of scribble it in a bit better. I think really what we need is more of a sense of that glow on the ground. So I'm going to put it up to about 15% size, still at the 5% opacity. and just tap in a bit more on that ground level. Just a few taps. Maybe back down again, 10%, and just extend that across a little bit. Not too much, just a few times. And then, well, maybe at the 15%, I could just start to circle that in just a little bit into this whole area as well. I'm creeping it into this area, but not up near the head, not quite. So anywhere where there's details, you can just sort of trace around there a little bit more now, just to create that overall glow. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to put it underneath what we've just created. So layer 4 goes underneath layer 3. I'm going to use the first color on the middle row. I'm going to have it at around 2% size and 15% opacity. I'm just going to build in some extra kind of textures. In fact, that's too big. So let's put that down to the lowest part of 2%. There's quite a margin or quite a range within a percentage sometimes. So I'm just going to swirl in some extra divisions there. Even the percentage is quite strong, so down to 10%. So we're just following some of the shapes, but creating sort of layers that support some of the top things we've already got. And again, just echo some of the shapes, some of the direction. You don't want to necessarily work against them, but you can complement them with other tendrils, other layers of texture that just kind of go in similar directions and support it. And maybe into some of these other areas, perhaps we can just bring supporting secondary tendrils that are not quite as prominent, but they still have an influence in the background there. So they just kick out and maybe separate, and little detachable elements. So we have kind of floating pieces too. And then from this lower area, perhaps we just need some that kind of, and then when we get to this bottom section, maybe we can just create a few that flatten out a little bit. It can still kick back up, but we're going to have a few that are just trailing along the floor. Just lightly add these in, and just a suggestion I think is going to be enough, that the tendrils somehow come down here and then rest on the floor perhaps. But someone that could even kick back up and add to the flow of other things. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer on top, and I'm going to go to the sixth color on the top row. Stay with the soft brush within airbrushing, 2% size, and put it up to about 30% opacity. And it's just a warmer color that's coming in here, just hugging the side of this little character to begin with. And it's just going to catch some of the different lights that are going to be within our scene. And there's a certain sense that this character is kind of luminescent in its own right, but it is also somehow picking up on the light in the kind of environment too. So it's a strange combination of the two. So I'm going over some of the top edges, the little green light colors. So I'm imagining this color is kind of coming in from the sides. So I'm going to prioritize those edges that are pointing up a little bit. I'm going to turn that size of the brush up to 3% and then down to about 15% strength. And I'm just going to bring its influence a bit more strongly up, and then maybe just between those two sections, I'm just going to color it in a little bit, kind of fuse them together a little bit, just so we're getting a little bit more warmth in there as well. Don't need to do it as much on both sides, just like so. Might be a bit strong there, so with the eraser set to the soft brush, 6% size will do, 30% strength, just knock some of that back a little bit, just a hint. Then I'm going to create a new layer, change the blend mode from that little N, from normal to add, stay with the same color and the same brush, soft brush, but I'm going to turn it down, lowest part 2%, 10% opacity, and we're just going to exaggerate some of these areas now. It's just going to really bring out the brightness in what we've just done. So initially, I'm just taking it around the top edge. This time I'm going to go all the way around the top. Yeah, still prioritizing the top of these tendrils a bit more. Let's just add it to this little folding area on mine. This bit that kicks up and faces towards the light more. Yours may end up with some very different shapes, but you use the general idea. then you should be able to come up with something similar. Okay, I'm going to stay on the same layer, but I'm going to change color to the first color on the middle row. And I'm just going to put the brush size down to the lowest part of 2%, just before it becomes 1. Stay at the 10% opacity. And again, I'm just going to start adding some little breakaway sections, just like we have one or two of them in the background that are just loose. We'll have little breaks in the texture of the tendrils as well. But we could also add them to the background as well, why not? Don't need to do too many of them to really build in a nice effect. And then I'm going to change from that colour to the next colour, which is just an order brighter. And I'm also going to turn the opacity up to about 15. Doesn't need to be too dramatic with this. Perhaps just turn it down into that 1%, so a touch smaller. Again, we're building in some really bright areas in some places. Be selective. Again, yours won't be exactly the same as mine anyway, so you might make some different choices as to where to put some of these lights, and that's absolutely fine. Now I've got a main section here that just needs a little bit more clarity, just a couple of little edges that make it stand out a little bit more perhaps. You're probably likely to have one or a couple of really big swirling shapes that are going to be more dramatic and really more prominent in the center. That's fine, just make a little bit more of a feature of them. I'm going to turn the brush size up to 4% and strength down to 5. And again, we'll just go over some of these areas where we've got that sense of a glow and exaggerate them a bit more, why not? Doesn't matter if it goes over the edge, because it's going to have a little bit of a halo effect, and that could really work. I think staying on the same layer, I'm going to put the brush size up to 5% size, 5% opacity, and stick with this first colour on the middle row. And just in this bottom area, I don't really want there to be too much contrast between the dark and the light, so just mush it together a little bit where it seems like the dark colour is showing through too much. Or we could even go back to layer 4, and again, we could do the same thing, just to condense it all together so it's not quite as fragmented looking. I think that will work better. Again, just add some more onto the base on the floor. Okay, I'm going to go to the very top and create a new layer, change the blend mode from normal to add, and I'm going to go in with the luminance light pen. I'm going to choose the first color again on the middle row. I'm going to have the brush size at 30% and 30% opacity, and zoom in a bit. And we're just going to trace around some of these edges. I want them to kind of glow a little bit more. You can use this pen and this effect to really just exaggerate what we've already done where it's necessary. If something isn't quite smooth enough, you can go in and just smooth it in a bit more. If you're not happy with some of these kind of ragged, jagged edges, then yeah, just go in and use this pen to smooth them in and make them flow a little bit differently. It's a good pen for doing this with. It has a better flow. Might change it to the 6th colour on the top row as well. That way we can just bring in some of these warmer colours into the mix. Maybe they're just the top edge of some of these tendrils that are still, for the most part, going to be picking up the warmth, but we can still have that very strong highlight. We can have some more elements that are just floating as well. Maybe change back to the first colour on the middle row, and we could really add a few different elements in this lower section. I think that they add a little bit more dynamism, makes things move and gives it a different quality. So we could really just add a few more elements down here as well. Maybe turn the opacity down, just so you can be a bit more subtle in the mix. Add a few more. Back up again, 30%. And 1 or 2 things. Might start to simplify things a little bit, so I'm going to take that top layer and merge it down. So we've got 2 layers that have the blend mode to add. And still on that same layer, I'm going to go in back with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to use the first color on the bottom row, 5% size, 5% opacity, and I'm just going to tap in a few times on the top of this little creature's head. It's really going to just be getting the light, catching the light in this area. Maybe I'll go to the sixth color on the top row as well and just use that to blend in even more. And again, just blend it around the sides a little bit. It's got a little bit of a spillover at the top, and I think that's absolutely fine too. Just that little halo that will work. I might just go with the selection, freehand, draw around that top section, then go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur that in a little bit so it's just a little bit softer. Just blends it in, makes it a little bit nicer. With the soft brush, within airbrushing, on this top layer, I'm going to go to the sixth color and just want to put this at 2% size, 5% opacity, and I just want to soften them in a little bit. Don't want to go too much into the face area of our character, but just a little bit down there. And I think it's about time we started to deal with the character's face, so we're going to go to the top and create a new layer on top of that. And I'm just going to draw an oval, hold, and it should snap to a better oval. If you're not confident about drawing them. Another one, hold it, should snap. It doesn't matter if they're not absolutely precisely the same at all. Having said that, if you're not happy with the placement, then you could always go to the selection, grab it, transform, and just move it to where you think it's going to work best. You could even change the size of it. Do the same with the other one. Grab it, selection, change the size, rotate it even, move it till you're happiest with it, and then I would just recommend just color it in manually. Only takes a moment. And then, well, you can just experiment with what kind of mouth you're happiest with. I just want something quite simple. You know, there are different kind of scarier ones. You could have more of a downturned mouth. Just get a little simple mouth in there to begin with. Slightly off center it, I think it looks a bit cuter. I'm just going to change the brush from the hard brush to the soft brush. Stay on the same color, 2% size, 15% opacity, and just create a little bit of a shadow at the top edge. Just give it some 3D-ness. Just a hint, maybe the mouth as well, just a hint. Go to our layers, create a new layer, change the blend mode from normal to add on the new layer. Go to our brushes, luminance, light pen, to our colors. I'm going to go for the third color. I'm going to go for 30% size and 30% strength, and I'm just going to put the pupils, so to speak, in there. I'm going to have them just slightly closer towards each other like this, just a bit more comical, like that. Zoom in a bit more. I'm going to change to the orange, turn it down to 10% size, and well, let's go for 10% opacity, and I'm just going to trace a lighter color. In fact, that's too weak. Let's put it up to 20% and just trace a highlight along the bottom, up the sides a little bit. I'm going to go to the first color on the middle row and just have a bit of a highlight, really bringing out the mouth so it's more noticeable. And we might go to the white, and just because it is kind of like a cartoon, we might just have a little bit of shine on that, the black of the eye there, just to have a bit of a reflection. Slight change in mind with the mouth. I just want it slightly more offset and a little bit smaller, something like this. I think it's quite cute. And then again, we need to just go with the luminance light pen to the first color on the middle row. Just give it a little bit of a highlight so it really will stand out better as well. Now, when you have a facial feature and other things colliding with it, maybe go back a layer with the soft brush eraser and just gently remove something from the immediate areas and just give the feature a little bit more space to breathe. Whatever you need to do, just go back through all layers if necessary. Not that last layer. That doesn't need deleting. Probably a smudge for that layer. If there's anything on that layer that's interfering, then just smudge that in. I think that's going to just give the face a little bit more space. Stay on the same layer. I'm going to go back to the airbrushing last touch, soft brush, put it up to, well, about 20% size, stay low down at 5%, and I'm going to go to the first color on the middle row and yeah, I'm just going to build in a general glow in and around the whole ghost. Okay, just looking at some of the glow that I've added in the background, I think I need to reduce it. So it's on the top layer. I'm going to go to the eraser, airbrushing soft brush, put it up to, I don't know, 20% size, 20% strength, opacity, and just go over it a couple of times. Just reduce it back. It's still going to be there a little bit, but I am reducing it. You can still see it on the thumbnail. It is still adding a bit more glow, but I have reduced it. The eyes have extended their glow a little bit too much onto the ghost face, so I'm going to go still with the soft brush with an airbrushing on the eraser, turn it down to 2% size, 20% strength, go in there, just reduce that down so that we've got a nice gap. And something else I've noticed is that where we drew a boundary selection area and blurred it in slightly, it's left a little bit of an edge. So we need to go back to layer 6 where that is. Smudge tool, soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 30% strength, and we can just mush that together wherever it looks too apparent. That's pretty much got rid of that. So I'm happy with the overall shape and the colours and the general effect, but I think some of this could be softened in a little bit more using the smudge tool. So what I'm going to do to fix that is go to the top layer, then go to the wrench, copy canvas, and then immediately paste becomes available. And you can't really see that anything changed there, but there is actually a layer now on top that contains the entire image as a flat image. But this is really something you're only going to do at the very end. Now, some of these details look a little bit sketchy, a little bit ragged. So we're going to go in again with the smudge to the soft brush with an airbrushing, maybe top end of 2% size, 40% strength. And I'm just going to go for some of these harsher edges and just soften them in. And it just means that then where you've got an area perhaps where you've got quite a few rough textures, you can just soften them in and create more of a flow. Some of these shapes just make it look a little bit nicer in some areas. It's only going to be needed in some bits, but yeah, I think it will make a difference. So anywhere where it looks a little bit too rough and kind of sketched, we want to extend some of these shapes a little bit more, just smooth it in, soften its impact where you think it will benefit. Just create a little bit of a kind of silkier aesthetic. I think it works. I'm literally just scribbling over some areas. Gives you the right kind of look, or an enhanced look. I think it's better for it anyway. Maybe we'll increase it to 5% and just some of these wisps that just wander off the edge, I can just soften them in as well. Don't want them too clear. And I think that works better. One last layer on top now, change the blend mode from normal to add. I'm going to go back in with the luminance light pen and I'm going to change my color to this color, the 6th color on the top row. And I think just with maybe 20% size, 30% strength, I'm just going to brighten up some of these top edges. They're just going to catch the light a little bit more dramatically, I think. Maybe the dips as well, so the peaks and troughs, but not the sides, but just exaggerate them a little bit more. Press on that top edge, for example, that top edge. Just increases the glow. I think I prefer that. Maybe that top bit there. Maybe just a couple of lines in here to, again, just create some more definition where needed. It's quite a nice flowing brush anyway, this. Compared to the airbrush at times can look a bit too sketchy. Okay, I'm going to leave it at this point. I think the balance is just about right. I hope you've enjoyed following along. And if you do have a go, make sure to share your results with me. I've got my socials down in the video description. Leave me a comment. Give me some suggestions, please, about the kind of thing that you might want to see in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I shall catch you back here soon. Bye for now.